The morning settled over the base with a quiet hum, broken only by the scrape of metal and the steady pulse of routine work. A figure knelt beside a battered transport truck, focusing on the rhythm of tightening bolts, hoping the simple task might drown out heavier memories. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate, carrying an energy that shifted the air before a word was spoken. The pause behind her felt too long, too aware, as if someone was studying more than her work. When the stranger finally spoke, it wasn't her task he questioned, but the name on the wall just inches from where she crouched. A name she had avoided for years, a name that should have stayed buried. Yet here it was, rising again, threatening to pull her back into a story she never wanted to explain. The moment hung sharp, inviting a truth she feared would break the fragile life she had built. What truth had she hoped the shadows would keep hidden? The moment lingered longer than she expected, stretching into an uneasy stillness that wrapped itself around the bay. She could feel the weight of old memories pressing against the edges of her thoughts, urging their way back into a life she had carefully rebuilt. The Admiral's stare wasn't accusatory, yet it carried a depth that suggested he knew more than he intended to say. Around them, the base continued its steady rhythm, oblivious to the quiet shift unfolding in one forgotten corner. She wished the morning air would scatter the past like dust, but the name carved in metal had already dug its way into the present. Whatever came next would not be simple, and she sensed that the first thread of an unwanted story had already been pulled loose. The silence broke with a single breath, not loud but steady, as if someone had decided that avoiding the truth was no longer an option. She felt the old fear rise in her chest, not of danger, but of recognition, of someone connecting her present to a past she never discussed. Nearby tools remained untouched, their quiet presence mocking the simplicity she once hoped this job would bring. She wondered how long she could stand in that silence before everything unraveled. The Admiral's gaze softened just enough to hint at understanding. Yet there was something searching in his eyes, something that suggested the past he remembered was not the one she lived through. A distant aircraft rumbled overhead, sending vibrations through the concrete floor as the world outside carried on without pause. She wished she could move with it, escape on the wind, and leave the questions behind. Instead, she remained grounded, caught between the memory of who she once was and the person she pretended to be now. The Admiral spoke softly, not demanding answers, yet clearly searching for them. His tone suggested he had seen loss before, and perhaps he recognized its shadow in her. She forced herself to stay still, knowing that running would only confirm what he suspected. Nothing about the moment felt fair. She had chosen this quiet corner of the world because it offered anonymity, a place where the past held no authority. Now, with one unexpected glance at a plaque, that safety seemed to crumble. The Admiral's questions were gentle, but their implications struck deep, pulling at wounds she thought had healed. The truth hovered between them, delicate yet unavoidable, pressing her to decide whether to reveal what she had hidden or continue the fragile lie that shielded her life. The future seemed to hinge on a single breath. The rest of the day moved with an uneasy rhythm, as if the air itself sensed a story stirring beneath the surface. She tried returning to her tasks, hoping the familiar scrape of tools might steady her thoughts, but the weight of earlier moments clung stubbornly. The name on the wall had followed her like a quiet echo, tugging her attention no matter how hard she pushed it aside. She wondered how long she could keep the truth sealed before the questions grew sharper, more insistent. Even routine faces around the base seemed to watch her differently, not with judgment but with curiosity she didn't want. A past once buried had begun to crack open, and the more she resisted, the more it pressed forward. By midday, whispers drifted across the workstations, fragments of speculation carried with casual chatter. She kept her head low, pretending not to notice, yet every half-heard sentence chipped away at her fragile calm. The world she had built depended on quiet anonymity, not the sudden swirl of attention that now circled her. The memory of a distant day threatened to rise, the one tied to the name carved in bronze. She steadied her breath, reminding herself she owed no explanations. Yet something inside whispered that this moment had been waiting to surface all along. By avoiding the past, she had unknowingly given it power. Later in the afternoon, the day's routine shifted as an unexpected message pulled her toward the administrative building. Each step tightened the knot in her stomach, though she kept her pace steady. The corridors were familiar, yet today they felt narrower, as if guiding her toward an answer she wasn't ready for. She reminded herself that fear had no place here, but old memories whispered otherwise. The past held a sharpness she had spent years trying to dull, and now it seemed ready to pierce through again. Whatever waited behind the closed door ahead would shape what came next. The room felt strangely calm when she stepped inside, though that calm carried an anticipation that settled deep. She listened carefully, searching for any sign of accusation, but none came. Instead, she was met with a quiet desire to understand, which somehow felt even more unsettling. She kept her words measured, offering only what the present required. Yet beneath each sentence lay the weight of unspoken history. The conversation moved gently, but every pause reminded her of the truth she still kept hidden. She wondered how long kindness could hold before curiosity demanded answers she wasn't ready to give. As she walked away from the meeting, the sun had dipped low enough to cast long shadows across the concrete, stretching toward her like reminders she couldn't outrun. Nothing in the conversation had forced the truth, yet the concern she saw made it clear the moment of choice was nearing. She paused beside the quiet hum of machinery, letting the warmth of the fading day settle against her skin. Change, once unwelcome, now felt inevitable. The past no longer waited patiently behind her, it walked beside her, matching every step. She knew she would have to speak eventually, but not yet. Not today. Night settled over the base with a stillness that made every distant sound feel sharper. She remained at her workstation long after others had gone, hoping the quiet might ease the storm that had grown inside her since morning. Yet, silence only gave space for memories to breathe, and they rose with unwelcome clarity. She felt torn between the life she lived now and the one she had buried so deeply, it almost felt like someone else's story. The tension of holding two truths pulled at her, leaving her unsure which version of herself the world expected. As the hum of evening generators echoed, she wondered if staying silent was strength or simply fear wearing a familiar mask. A soft shuffle of footsteps behind her broke the quiet, pulling her from thoughts she hadn't asked for. She stiffened, unsure if she was ready for another conversation, especially one that might push her closer to truths she wasn't prepared to reveal. The presence that approached carried no tension, only a gentle concern that felt harder to face than anger. She kept her gaze low, hoping the moment would pass quickly, but something in the air said it wouldn't. She had avoided connections to protect herself, yet here she stood, realizing that distance wasn't as safe as she once believed. The world around her had begun to shift, and she didn't know whether to resist or let it happen. The conversation unfolded slowly, shaped more by pauses than words. She didn't offer much, yet the quiet understanding in the air softened the edges of her guarded thoughts. She found herself surprised by how much she wanted to trust someone, even if trust still felt like stepping onto thin ice. The weight she carried pressed heavily, but for the first time it didn't feel like she was holding it alone. She sensed that the walls she built weren't impenetrable after all, though lowering them still felt risky. As the night deepened, she realized she feared not the truth itself, but the moment it would change everything. Later, when she stepped outside, the cool night air met her with a clarity she hadn't felt all day. Stars glittered above the darkened base, quiet and distant, yet somehow comforting. She walked slowly across the open lot, letting each breath steady her. The world felt wider under the night sky, less suffocating than the confined rooms where questions lingered. She understood now that the past would not stay hidden, no matter how tightly she tried to hold it back. But she also sensed that facing it didn't have to mean losing the life she'd built. Somewhere between memory and the present moment lay a path she wasn't ready to see, but she felt its pull all the same. As she approached the edge of the field, a distant hum drifted from the command building, soft but insistent, as though calling her back towards something unfinished. She paused, letting the sound settle over her. The day had begun with routine simplicity, and unraveled into a reckoning she never anticipated. Yet a small part of her felt lighter now. The truth might have been stirred, but it no longer seemed like an enemy she had to outrun. She looked back at the base, feeling the faint spark of resolve forming where fear had lived for so long. Whatever tomorrow brought, she knew she was closer than ever to deciding who she would be when the past finally met the present. Morning arrived with a pale, washed-out light that made the base feel strangely unfamiliar. She moved through her routine with steady hands, but her mind drifted back to the questions that lingered after the night before. Something inside her had shifted, not enough to feel like certainty, but enough to make avoidance feel heavier than honesty. She sensed that the day would pull her closer to a truth she could no longer outrun. Even simple tasks felt weighted, as if every bolt tightened or form signed brought her one step nearer to a moment she wasn't prepared for. The world around her seemed to be waiting, and she felt caught between stepping forward or turning away. The quiet of the morning didn't last. A request arrived that pulled her toward the administrative wing once again. She walked the familiar path with a steadier pace than before, though she felt the faint tremble of uncertainty beneath it. Something about the message felt different, less routine, more intentional. She sensed that another conversation waited, one that might touch deeper places than the last. As she crossed the hallway threshold, a mix of dread and resolve settled in her chest. She knew she couldn't hide behind silence forever, but speaking aloud what she carried still felt like stepping toward a cliff's edge. The room felt heavier this time, filled with a different kind of silence. She took a seat, unsure what to expect, but prepared to hear questions that might reach closer to the heart of what she hid. Instead, the tone remained gentle, almost hesitant. The concern was evident, but there was also respect. An understanding that this was not a story to be pried open. She found herself breathing easier, even as she circled around truths she wasn't ready to name. The moment carried a quiet promise that when she chose to speak, it would be on her own terms. For the first time, she felt seen beyond the shadows of her past. When she left the building, the sunlight had grown brighter, warming the walkway beneath her boots. She took a slow breath, feeling a sense of clarity forming at the edges of her thoughts. Nothing had been forced, yet everything seemed to be nudging her toward a decision she had avoided for too long. She realized that the fear she carried wasn't only about the past, but about what others might see when the truth finally emerged. Still, something in the day's conversations made the idea feel less like a threat and more like a possibility. She wasn't ready to speak, not yet, but she felt closer than ever to finding the courage. Later, as she made her way back toward the motor pool, a faint hum of activity filled the air, grounding her in the steady rhythm of the base. The world felt steadier now, though uncertainty still lingered. She paused near the open bay, letting the familiar scent of oil and metal settle her thoughts. She understood that the past would always be part of her, but it no longer felt like an anchor pulling her under. Instead, it felt like a weight she could learn to carry without letting it define every step she took. She wasn't ready to face everything at once, but she sensed the moment was coming. And when it did, she wouldn't run. The day deepened into a quiet afternoon, and the base settled into its familiar rhythm, though something within her felt anything but familiar. She moved through her tasks with a steadiness she didn't fully feel, trying to anchor herself in routine. But the questions she had avoided for years pressed at the edges of her thoughts, refusing to fade. She sensed that change was coming, not forced upon her, but rising naturally from the cracks of everything she had tried to bury. There was fear, yes, but also a faint spark of readiness she hadn't known she possessed. The weight she carried no longer felt like something she had to hide. Instead, it felt like something she might one day share. The possibility unsettled her and comforted her all at once. By mid-afternoon, the quiet was broken by footsteps approaching from across the bay. She didn't turn immediately, feeling the familiar tension rise. But the sound held no urgency, only patience. She braced herself anyway, unsure if she was ready for another conversation about the things she had left unspoken. Yet, when the presence drew closer, she sensed no pressure, just a gentle curiosity that made the moment feel less like a confrontation and more like an invitation. She wondered when she had last allowed someone to stand with her in silence without feeling the need to run. Perhaps trust was not built in grand gestures, but in these small, steady moments that slowly softened the fear she carried. Their conversation unfolded more easily than she expected. No probing questions, no pressure to reveal anything she wasn't ready for. Just simple words carried by understanding. She felt her guard lowering despite herself, not from obligation, but from the quiet relief that came with being seen, without judgment. The past still loomed behind her like a long shadow, yet for the first time it felt possible to step out from beneath it. She realized that courage didn't always arrive with dramatic certainty. Sometimes it grew slowly, shaped by people who showed patience where others might demand answers. And in that slow growing, something inside her began to shift toward honesty. When the conversation ended, she stepped outside to clear her mind. The air carried a hint of wind, brushing across her face as if urging her to breathe deeper. She stared across the open field, letting the vastness soothe the knot of tension inside her. She had spent years believing that revealing anything about her past would shatter the fragile peace she had built. Now she wondered if keeping silent had cost her more than speaking ever could. The day had shown her that not everyone sought answers to satisfy curiosity. Some simply wanted to understand. That realization eased something inside her, leaving space for a possibility she never expected. The thought of finally telling the truth. As evening approached, she returned to the motor pool one last time, drawn not by obligation but by the need to stand in the place where everything had changed. The setting sun cast warm colors across the concrete, painting the familiar space with quiet significance. She walked slowly, letting each step settle the conflicting emotions swirling inside her. The truth was no longer something to fear. It was something waiting for the right moment. She knew she wasn't ready to speak yet. But the silence she kept no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a choice. And for the first time, the choice didn't weigh her down. It steadied her. Tomorrow, she thought, might be different. The next morning arrived heavy with a sense of inevitability. She moved through her routine with a quiet resolve she hadn't felt before, as though something inside her had finally stopped fighting. The day didn't feel different on the surface. Same engines humming, same distant calls across the base. But the way she carried herself shifted. The fear that once held her throat tight felt looser now. Not gone, but no longer in control. She knew the past still waited, patient and unyielding. But the dread surrounding it had thinned. She found herself wondering what might happen if she stopped resisting and chose to meet it instead. Each small task she completed felt like another step toward a moment she could no longer delay. A moment she hadn't yet defined but could sense coming. Before long, the quiet was interrupted by a request for her presence. The message carried no urgency, yet the timing made her chest tighten. She hesitated only a moment before making her way across the base, the familiar buildings passing by like markers on a path she knew too well. With each step, the weight inside her shifted from fear to something closer to acceptance. She didn't know what would be asked when she arrived, but she understood that ignoring the call would only prolong what she already knew she needed to face. The air felt sharper, the sounds around her more defined, as if the world itself leaned in to witness whatever choice she would make. The conversation that followed surprised her. Instead of pressure, she found patience. Instead of questions, she found room to breathe. She realized that people around her weren't waiting to pry open her past. but were waiting for her to trust them enough to share it on her own terms. The idea was disorienting. After years of expecting judgment, she found understanding instead. The quiet in the room gave her space to think, to feel, to finally acknowledge that she no longer wanted to carry the story alone. She didn't speak the truth yet, but she felt the first real flicker of readiness. It was enough to shift something deep inside her. When she finally stepped back outside, the air felt warmer, almost welcoming. She lingered on the walkway, allowing the sunlight to settle her thoughts. For so long, she had believed that the truth would unravel everything she had built. Yet now she questioned whether it might instead strengthen it. The bass buzzed with the same steady rhythm as always, but she felt positioned differently within it. Less like someone hiding in the shadows, more like someone slowly stepping forward. She didn't know when she would speak, but the distance between fear and honesty had grown smaller, and she sensed the moment approaching like a slow sunrise inching over the horizon. As the afternoon deepened, she found herself walking toward the quiet corner of the base, where the memorial wall stood. She paused several feet away, unsure if she was ready to stand before it again. The engraved names seemed to shimmer in the light, each one carrying a story, a memory, a weight. She felt the pull of her own story within those lines. No longer a ghost she fled from, but a truth she would one day face openly. She stood there in silence, letting the past and present settle together in her mind without conflict. For the first time, the fear didn't return. Instead, she felt steady. Uncertain, yes, but ready to take the next step when the moment arrived. The morning came bright and clear, carrying a sense of finality she could feel before she even opened her eyes. It wasn't dread this time, nor the heavy pull of fear, but something calmer. Like the world had been waiting patiently for her to reach this point. She walked across the base with a steadiness she had not known in years, each step shaped by a quiet resolve that surprised her. The questions, the whispers, the memories, none of them held the same weight anymore. She understood now that she could not change the past, but she could choose what it meant going forward. And that choice felt less like surrender and more like freedom. The day stretched ahead of her, open and waiting, and for the first time she felt ready to meet it without hiding. When she entered the quiet office, the moment felt different from everyone that came before it. There was no knot in her stomach, no instinct to retreat, only a clear sense that the time for silence had finally passed. She took a seat without being asked, breathing steadily as the stillness settled around her. She felt the weight of years pressed gently at her back, not as a threat, but as a reminder of everything she had survived. This was the moment she had avoided, feared, and pushed away, yet now it felt almost natural. She didn't plan her words. She simply trusted they would come when she was ready. And for the first time, she was. As she spoke, the room grew still, holding her words with quiet respect. She didn't recount every detail, just enough for the truth to finally breathe. The memories carried pain, yes, but also strength she hadn't recognized until now. She felt something shift inside her with every sentence, as though releasing the past loosened a weight she had carried alone for too long. There were moments she paused, unsure if she could continue, but the steady presence across from her gave her the courage she needed. By the time she finished, the silence that followed no longer felt heavy. It felt earned. Stepping outside afterward, she felt lighter than she had in years. The air tasted different somehow, cleaner and brighter, as though the world itself had exhaled with her. She paused at the walkway's edge, letting the sunlight warm her face. The truth she once feared had not shattered her life. It had opened it. People carried many stories, some heroic, some painful, all human. She understood now that being honest about hers didn't diminish her, but allowed her to stand in the present without the shadow of secrecy. The future no longer felt like a path she tiptoed along. It felt like something she could walk into with her head high. Before returning to her duties, she made her way back toward the memorial wall one last time. This time, she didn't stop at a distance. She approached the engraved name slowly, letting her fingers hover over the metal without touching it. The past no longer felt like something she needed to outrun or erase. It was simply part of the path that led her here, painful, yes, but also filled with meanings she could now carry openly. She took a long breath, feeling both the ache and the pride intertwined. Then she stepped back, no longer burdened by the shadows behind her. For the first time, she walked away not with fear, but with clarity, finally ready to live the life she had chosen.